Today for Senate Education Committee meeting, we are going to start off with an overview presentation by our reviser. And JG, are you going to talk also? If called upon, okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to have an overview on, so we passed out Senate Bill 83. It went to the House. They made it House substitute for Senate Bill 83. So on Monday, we will start negotiations with the House committee. And so we want to make sure that everyone on this committee understands the differences between the two bills, as well as some components that have been addressed in other bills. So we'll start off with that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of the bill, I'll tell you what you're being handed. The large sheet is kind of a side-by-side comparison of Senate Bill 83 as it left the Senate. The middle column is House substitute for 83.
We don't have it yet. We're almost there. I have to say that our reviser and our legislative research people are the best. They worked on this for us, and you've come through every year, so thank you. And then we'll give you a grade after we've heard all of this, okay?
Yeah, that might have been premature, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, we do appreciate it.
So as I was saying, on the larger sheet that you have, the first column on the left is Senate Bill 83 and its components as it left the Senate. The middle column are the components of House substitute for Senate Bill 83. And the third column is other bills that exist out there that have similar provisions as are what in 83. The other document you have is the reviser memorandum, and this is on the Sunflower Education Equity Program that is included in 83. So this goes into a little bit more detail on exactly what that program is. All right, so Senate Bill 83, when it left the Senate, amended the tax credit for low-income student scholarship program. And at its introduction, this was the same as House Bill 2048 that was introduced in the House, but there were amendments made to Senate Bill 83 on the Senate floor. There were 4 changes. The definition of eligible student included a limitation for certain students that would be 400% of the federal poverty guidelines. And if you look all the way over in the third column, you can see that in House Bill 2048, it was 250%. Senate Bill 83 also included children who were adopted in the definition of eligible student. Adopted was not in House Bill 2048. The total tax credit a payer could claim is $100,000 in the Senate bill and $500,000 in the House bill. And the tax credit in the Senate bill is 75% of the contribution to this scholarship granting organization. And in the House bill, it was 100% of that contribution. The House substitute for Senate Bill 83 completely removed all of the tax credit for low-income student scholarship program provisions from the bill. So that is not in Senate Bill 83 at all. So I'm going to turn to Senate Bill 83. I don't know if you guys have a copy of Senate Bill 83. Okay. So there are some whereas clauses on the first page. Those are relevant to the Sunflower Education Equity Program. And following that is new section 1. And this contains appropriations. So if you have any questions on section 1, I would defer those to JG. But this appropriates $592 million for special education state aid for fiscal year 2024. Also included is a proviso that establishes the Special Education and Related Services Task Force, which is also established by House Bill 2060, which is currently sitting in this committee. So now I'm going to get into the Sunflower Education Equity Scholarship Program. And this is sections 2 through 14 and section 16 of 83. So I'm going to give you a very,
May I ask a question? Senator Dietrich.
yeah.
I appreciate everything you're saying. Are we talking, when you say, do we have a copy of Senate Bill 83? Which version?
House substitute for Senate Bill 83, as amended by the House Committee of the Whole. Yes. Yes. I appreciate the clarification. Oh, I will note on the appropriations piece, there are a couple of other appropriations bills hanging out there. You can see that in the third column. So sub for Senate Bill 155 does appropriate $520.4 million for special education state aid, and that's for fiscal years 24 and 25. And then House substitute for Senate Bill 113 appropriates $592.7 million for special education state aid for fiscal year 25. So those are the other appropriations that are hanging out there in different bills. So back to Senate Bill 83.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. You're here today. Senator Blasey.
Thank you. All right, House Bill 155. What was the original contents?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look.
Okay, and then I assume that the difference in terms of increased state aid to special education is the 592 minus the 520, which would be a total of 72.
Yes.
Okay, and that's what was that what the governor proposed in the first year? What was 555? So it's higher than what the governor proposed. Okay.
Yes, JG, why don't you answer that, please?
Sorry. For 2024, the governor proposed the 592 and then added another 72 million in 25 on top of that.
Senator Sykes.
So JG, that 592 would be basically what the previous year, or what is that 592? How does that?
The previous year was 520 million. So this added the governor's $72.4 million in to appropriate it for the 595 in 24, and then added another 72 million in 25 and appropriated that. And I believe that was about the first time I remember being appropriated special education for the out year.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions? Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm tracking on all of the different bills, but assuming that none of these would be adopted, what is the funding in the budget, or is it in the budget yet?
You mean SPED? You mean SPED?
Right now, the Senate, one sub for 155 has the $520 million in it for 2024 and does not add the money in 25 either. So it stays at the previous level. That'd be the level that was being spent in 2023 that carried into 2024. The $520 million is what's in the budget now.
Go ahead.
Okay, so now I'm going to get into the provisions that deal with the Sunflower Education Equity Act, and this starts in Section 2 of the bill. So the Sunflower Education Equity Program would provide education savings accounts for qualified students. This program would be administered by the state treasurer, and any qualified student who meets the requirements of the program would receive an amount equal to 95% of the base aid amount in such student's account in each year that the student participates in the program. So Section 2 of Senate Bill 83 provides definitions for relevant terms, including qualified school and qualified student. A qualified school is any school located in Kansas that is a non-public preschool, elementary, or secondary school that has received approval to participate in the program. And a qualified student is a resident of Kansas who is eligible to enroll in a public elementary or secondary school in the state, or preschool student, age 3 or 4, who qualifies as a preschool aged at-risk student. Section 3 just formally establishes the program and states that it's administered by the treasurer. Section 4 provides the powers and duties of the treasurer. And you can see those starting at the bottom of page 5. Section 5 of the bill requires the treasurer to maintain certain program information on the treasurer's website and requires the Department of Education to include certain program information on its homepage and provide a link to the treasurer's website. Section 6 phases in the program over the next several school years. This is a little bit confusing, so I'm going to explain it as good as I can, and I'll be happy to answer your questions on this. So in school years 24-25, 25-26, and 26-27, the following students can participate in the program, and there's no limitation on the number of students, of these type of students who can participate in the program. So that would be any student who previously participated, any student who is enrolled in and attending public school in the previous year and is either eligible for free or reduced priced meals or scored at performance level 1 on either the English language arts state assessment or the mathematics state assessment. Any preschool student who meets the requirements to be a preschool aged at-risk student, and any student eligible to enroll in kindergarten in the current year who is eligible for free or reduced priced meals. So all of the students who meet that criteria could apply for the program. However, in school year 24-25, up to 2,000 of the following students may participate. Any student eligible to enroll in kindergarten or any of the grades 1 through 12 who does not attend a public school but has an annual family income of less than or equal to 300% of the federal poverty guidelines. In school year 25-26, that 2,000 number goes up to 4,000, and the federal poverty guideline percentage increases to 400%. And then in school year 26-27, the limitation on the number of students who may participate increases to 8,000 students, but that federal poverty guideline percentage stays at 400% for that school year. And then beginning in school year 27-28 and school years after that, any qualified student may participate in the program, regardless of whether they started in a public school or a non-public school, if that student has an annual family income of less than or equal to 600% of the federal poverty guidelines. So that is the phase-in of the program. Section 7 covers the application and enrollment to participate in the program, the establishment of an account, and the requirements of a written agreement. So Section 7 requires a parent of a qualified student seeking enrollment in the program to apply. And on a complete and accurate application, the treasurer will enroll the student in the program. After enrollment in the program, the parent of that student is required to enter into a written agreement with the treasurer. And the written agreement contains certain information that the parent is required to agree to in order to participate in the program. Once that written agreement is approved by the treasurer would establish an account in the name of the qualified student. Each student can only have one account. And if a parent is acting on behalf of more than one student, they have to have a separate written agreement and a separate account for each student. Written agreements would have a term of 1 year and can be renewed on an annual basis. Those agreements can be suspended upon certain actions. The treasurer may suspend written agreements if a parent fails or refuses to respond to a notice of suspension of a written agreement or fails to repay the costs of an unauthorized expenditure from an account. A parent can terminate a written agreement at any time. When an account is terminated, or when a written agreement is terminated, the account associated with that agreement is closed. Moving on to Section 8. Section 8 authorizes parents to make expenditures from a qualified student's account for specific educational purposes. And I'm not going to go through each one of those, but they are listed in the bill, starting kind of in the middle of page 11, if you want to see those. The treasurer is required to notify parents if there is an unauthorized expenditure from an account. The parent would then have to repay the amount of the unauthorized expenditure within 30 days. If a parent does not repay that expenditure, the written agreement may be terminated and the account closed. If the treasurer suspects there is substantial misuse of the monies in an account, that misuse can be referred to the Attorney General. Section 9 deals with all the money. So it establishes the Sunflower Education Equity Scholarship Fund in the state treasury. This would be administered by the treasurer. And every year, an amount equal to 95% of the base aid for the current school year would be deposited into the qualified student's account in 2 installments in a school year, once in August and once in January. If a student enrolls part-time in a public school, the treasurer would prorate the amount deposited in their account based on the part-time enrollment. And unless an account has been closed, it does roll over to the next year if they continue to renew their written agreement. If an account is no longer active, the treasurer will certify the amount remaining in the account and transfer any amount that's left over to the state general fund when the account is closed. The treasurer is authorized to retain 5% of the base aid amount for administrative purposes. And the treasurer is also authorized to contract with private financial management firms to manage the scholarship accounts. And the treasurer is required to conduct or contract to conduct annual audits on accounts. Section 10 provides for appeals of administrative decisions made by the treasurer. Section 11 is the section that deals with tutors and schools seeking to become qualified schools to apply to participate in the program. Section 12 requires qualified schools to provide qualified students who are enrolled full-time at that school instruction in reading, grammar, mathematics, social studies, and science. And there are some exceptions to that requirement that are also listed in Section 12. Section 13 pertains to tests and examinations. It requires qualified schools to provide test information to parents of qualified students. And it also allows the parent of a qualified student to request that student take a state assessment at the school district where the student resides. And that is the gist of the Sunflower Education Equity Program.
Committee, we're going to pause right there. What questions do we have? Senator O'Shea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few, but they should be quick. If the school's participating, does it have to be accredited through the state?
That is not a requirement of a qualified school in the program.
Follow-up.
Follow-up.
Senator Sykes and Senator Straub.
Thank you. The follow-up. So you said 3 and 4-year-olds would receive it. So essentially, it's expanding early childhood. And these 3 or 4-year-olds could go public or private with the money.
No. Yes, 3 and 4-year-olds, but only if they qualify as a preschool-aged at-risk student. So not all 3 and 4-year-olds, and only if they're attending a non-public preschool.
Follow-up.
Thank you. Maybe silly question, but do 3-year-old public schools cost 3-year-olds anything?
Okay. Clarify your question.
Okay. If just in general, if a public school has a 3 or 4-year-old classroom, it's not very common. But does it cost families to go to school there in a public school setting?
You may, please, Craig, come forward and identify yourself, and let's get a clarification on this.
Thank you. Craig Nineswander, State Department of Ed. If you're talking just a 3 and 4-year-old general education preschool program, the short answer is it depends. The local school board can decide whether to charge a fee or not. If it's a 3 or 4-year-old at risk, then the state provides funding on a 0.5 FTE basis.
So next we have Senator Sykes, then Senator Straub, and Senator Petty.
My question, the treasurer shall conduct annual audits. That's on every single account?
I don't think so, but they are also authorized to conduct random quarterly audits of accounts.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I think as I'm reading it, it says shall conduct annual financial audits and random on of the some equity scholarship accounts to ensure compliance. Could be questionable.
JG, did you want to answer that?
I believe that the annual would be similar to the state annual audit that they have to do to make sure that all the funds are going to the right place. And then the accounts would make sure that those accounts are spending the right funds, and those are more random quarterly, from my understanding.
Senator Straub, then Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions concerning qualified school and qualified students. So qualified school, it says that is a non-public school that has made application and received approval. Who is creating that application, and who is the board that determines approval or not?
The treasurer, the state treasurer both makes the application and does the approval. This version of the bill does not have any type of board.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to clarify that. And then the second part on the qualified student, so one of the criteria would be qualifies for free meals under the National School Lunch Program. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that families have to provide proof of income. They simply fill out a form and say that their household income is below such and such level, and that's what's generally accepted as qualifying for free school lunches. Is that correct?
Yes.
So there's really no way to prove whether or not these students are low income or anything, because there's no check, correct?
I believe they can audit up to 3% of those, but that is the extent.
So if they weren't qualified, what would happen after that audit?
They wouldn't be allowed to participate in the program.
Ever again?
Well, so the free and reduced price meals qualification is only for the first several years of the program. I believe it's in school year 27, 28, that it's 600% of the federal poverty guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Petty.
Thank you. Tamara, thanks for the process you've gone through with this bill. And I may have not been able to read this fast enough, but if a parent fills out a form to have a qualified student and they start in this program, the Sunflower, and they drop out, the Sunflower Education Equity Act, they drop out, then did I read that they can't go back to a public school, or what is that?
So if they're participating in the program and they enroll in a public school on a full-time basis, then they do lose the account.
So, okay, and then they could be.
Yes, we can repeat that.
So if a student is participating in the program and they're attending a qualified non-public school, and then they enroll in a public school full-time, they are no longer eligible under this program.
So do they then have to pay back? Does that?
There is no requirement to pay back the money in the bill.
Oh, I thought there was something about.
For that reason, if they use the money for an unauthorized expenditure, they are required to pay that back.
Senator Gossett. Oh, and Senator Dietrich. Okay.
On one of the bullets on page 9 of the supplemental note says, no immediate family member of a qualified student may collect payment, tuition, or fees for educational therapies or services or tutoring. I'm questioning the immediate family member, meaning this could only be used for the student who qualified for it and cannot be used for another family member for any purpose? Or would you have two students who could qualify for it? They'd each have their own funds.
So the second part of your statement is correct. If you have 2 students, each student would have their own account. The immediate family member is that if you have a parent who is homeschooling their child, the parent can't use the money in the account to pay themselves for providing that education to their child in their own home.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Dietrich and then Senator Sykes.
So this is a question about the treasurer's office and all the work that they're going to be doing. And I know there's that 5% that can be used for administrative costs and whatever. But in the fiscal note, they don't have a cost for what that might look like for the treasurer's office. There's got to be many people helping, I would think, with this. Because this isn't usually the function of a treasurer's office. To collect the money, yes, but the appeal process and the applications and those kinds of things. So did anybody talk about what that looks like?
I have not seen any official statements or testimony from the state treasurer's office. I will note that the bill does define treasurer to mean the state treasurer or his designee. So he could designate people to take on some of these tasks.
Thank you.
Senator Sykes.
That answered part of mine, but is there an updated fiscal note on the amended bill? And was there ever anything that showed possible new FTEs for the treasurer's office in even previous bills?
There is not an updated fiscal note as far as I know, and I would have to review the existing fiscal note on the previous version of the bill to respond to the second part of your question.
Senator Blasey.
So the money is obviously being administered by the treasurer's office, but the parent has to submit one of the qualifying expenses to the treasurer for reimbursement. Is it kind of like an HSA program? Or is the check going to be written straight to the parent to deposit in an account? I mean, how do we, where's the accountability, I guess?
So the audits are part of the accountability, and presumably because the accounts would be managed by the treasurer, he would be able to see where that money is going.
It's kind of like an HSA in a way, kind of.
Yes, and I will say if a qualified school, for example, is to provide a refund, that refund cannot go to the parent. It has to go directly back into the account.
Committee, any additional questions? I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much.
That was the end of the Sunflower Education Equity. Do you want me to continue on with the 83?
Yep.
Okay. So if you look on the back page of that larger sheet that I provided you back to the table, that large middle box there that talks about section 15, this requires school districts to provide a salary increase to every licensed teacher in the school district. And the amount of the increase would be determined as follows. So you would determine the amount of the increase in the base aid in school year 23-24 due to the inflation, and you would subtract the 22-23 base aid amount from the 23-24 base aid amount. Then you would determine the total funding increase attributable to the inflationary increase in school year 23-24 by multiplying the amount of the increase by the total weighted student enrollment, excluding certain weightings. Then you would determine half of the total funding increase attributable to the inflationary base, to the base aid amount. And then you would determine the amount of the salary increase for each licensed teacher by dividing half of the amount of the total funding increase attributable to the inflationary increase by the total number of licensed teachers employed by all school districts. And that amount would be the amount that each school district would provide as a salary increase to each licensed teacher, and this would be for the 23-24 school year.
Okay, I'm sure there should be some questions on that. I'd like to see a chart on that. Okay, we'll start with Senator Straub, then we'll move over to the other side of the room.
Thank you, Tamara, for the math problem. The word problem.
It is a word problem.
I'm tracking here. Okay, so hypothetical, you have, which actually this happens a lot, very small school, declining population or declining enrollment. So their enrollment is significantly lower than the previous year. And even with the increase in base aid, let's say that they don't have an increase in funding, how is a small school district like that to provide an increase in teacher salary if they don't actually have an increase in funding?
Hypothetically.
The bill does not speak to your hypothetical.
Okay. Quick follow-up.
Okay, so if this were the case, which I assume that it is very possible that this could happen, you would have school districts that have increasing enrollment, that have increasing funding, would disproportionately be increasing teachers' salaries significantly higher than small school districts that aren't receiving an increase in funding. And so we kind of create a disparity in teacher salaries across the state.
So JG can correct me if I'm wrong and jump in at any time, but I believe the calculation is done on a statewide basis. So every teacher would get the same amount.
Okay, so this is bringing in
You have
all
nodding heads.
combined all school districts.
Correct.
It's a statewide.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So now we'll go to Senator Gossage, then we'll go to Senator Petty.
Tamara, can you correct me, but isn't this the first time the state has ever gotten involved in teacher salaries per se, directly?
This is the first time in my tenure on Senate Education that the state has done something like this.
As technically, this is typically local control. Here are your total dollars. You decide how much is going to go which department, how much is going to go toward curriculum, how much is going to go to your third department head over transportation, and how much is going to go to teachers, correct? Or maybe I ask Senator
Now, let's be
Diedrich.
clear. It's not the state that's doing this. Right now, it is in a bill that came
Right,
over
but
from
that's
the
how it
House. So
would work,
that's what's
right?
been
The
proposed.
state would determine, I'm just trying to verify the difference between this and what is currently happening. Even though I taught school, things have changed since then. So Senator Dietrich is nodding, if I may address her, Madam Chair.
It is correct, though we have before authorized bonus, and that was with regard to COVID. And we stipulated that that was not just for faculty, and it was up to the local control for them to make that decision.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah. Senator Petty.
I think Tamara actually answered my question, but having to do, because as I read it, I thought, this is statewide, and this is not district by district. But, so it helped when Senator Straub was asking her question. But, and so it's statewide, it's the total amount of funding statewide, and then is it, clarify for me, is it based on the number of certified teachers the year of 22, 23?
Yeah, so if you have the bill, it's on the top of page 17. You would determine the figure arrived at by doing the previous math by dividing by the full-time equivalent number of licensed teachers employed by all school districts in school year 23-24.
23, so that 23, 24 would be that basis for the next, for the math problem, for the upcoming school year. So that, this is a year ahead, so it'd be the staff that for 23, 24 school year, but they would we be then going into the 24, 25 school year? So we're basing it on the faculty full-time equivalent, or we're basing it?
So the first line of this section says, in school year 23-24, each school district in the state shall increase the salary of each licensed teacher, and then provides the formula. So it's my understanding that this is all happening in school year 23-24.
And I'm going to call on JG right now.
And just want to be clear that what this is doing is the base increase. It's taking half of that base increase statewide and distributing half of that amount to the school districts and using the other half to pay for those salary increases. So it's not adding this amount on top of their base increase. It's taking half of that and distributing it in this manner.
Senator Blasey.
And so just to clarify that, JG, half that money for salary increases is strictly for licensed teachers. That does not include our paraprofessionals, cooks, and bus drivers that we're struggling to find. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Any further questions on that? All right, let's get to the 1 and 2A schools.
Okay. This is the last piece that I have to talk about today. And Section 17 of the bill would amend KSA 725132. And this would state that school districts who have been designated as 1A or 2A by the State High School Activities Association may use the greatest enrollment from any of the 4 preceding school years in their calculation for foundation aid. Currently, it is either the previous 2 school years.
Any question on that? Okay. Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tamara, could we look at, I know you're talking about Section 17, but I wanted to take a peek at Section 16, the compulsory attendance law. It's been on the books for many, 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 many years, and it looks like it's being amended significantly. Could you explain that?
Yeah, so this was part of the changes that came in with the Sunflower Education Equity Program. And so what this is saying, if I can get to the right page, is that a child that is a qualified student who is participating in that program shall be deemed to meet the compulsory attendance requirements.
Did you have a follow-up question?
Well, I was looking at the fiscal note explanation, thank you, Madam Chair, and it said that the bill would add a definition for private school to mean whatever, and then that even if it's a homeschool student, they don't have to meet any attendance requirements, and if they're in a private school, whether it's accredited or not, they don't have to meet any attendance requirements, is the way I'm reading that. Am I correct?
If the student is a qualified student participating in the program, so attending a qualified school, whatever that looks like for that student.
So you have 2, Madam Chair, so that means you would have 2 attendance requirements depending upon whether you're in the program or not. If I'm in the program, compulsory attendance doesn't count, but if she's not in that program, then she must follow the compulsory attendance laws that are on the books. Is that the way you interpret that? If you're in the program, compulsory attendance laws are not required. If you're not in the program, they still are.
I believe it is saying there is an assumption that you are meeting those requirements if you are participating in the program.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm confused, but I don't think you can clarify it any more than you already have. I think it's my problem. Thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions at this point about what's been presented? So why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this so that you are aware. Make sure that the concerns that you have, that you share them with me. Make sure that you share them with our vice chair or our ranking minority, because we will, I believe we're going to have our first meeting Monday. Is it noon? I think it's we're going to try and do first adjournment, because both the House and the Senate will be on the floor Monday. So we're going to try and do it first adjournment, which is typically lunch. We'll have lots to chew on. How's that? Okay. All right, so we are going to move out from our discussion. We just wanted to make sure that we had this group of folks, that you are aware of what's going on. On the House side, they already had the benefit because they reworked Senate Bill 83, so they already had the benefit of that as well. Well, we'll leave it at that.
Can we have a vote count of how that came out of the House?
We're going to get it. To something. Yeah.
Madam Chair, that would be 64 to 61.
So there we are in that. Okay, committee, we are going to pivot now. That's the end of discussion on Senate Bill 83, as well as House substitute for Senate Bill 83. And we are now going to move to Senate Bill 304. And so if we could have just a quick review. That is the act concerning school districts, authorizing the State Board of Education to establish new school districts for purposes of attachment of territory of a disorganized school district. So, quick update from the reviser on that.
So in addition to the information that the chair just provided, the bill would also provide for administrative and judicial review of resolutions to permanently close a school building.
We will start our discussion with any amendments, and I will call on Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have an amendment for Senate Bill 304, the reviser. If she would graciously pass that out. Tamara, would you want to explain, or do you want me to? It's up to you.
Who wants to explain? We'll ask the carrier of the amendment.
I'd be happy to.
Do you want to explain, or do you want?
No, I'd be happy to. Thank
Okay.
you. Yes. And please correct me, Tamara, if I forget something here. So I've had several meetings with the folks who brought this bill to us and trying to find a good solution for some of the situations that we're finding ourselves in. So first of all, this the State Board of Education can authorize a school district that's dissolved to form, to attach themselves to another school district. They do not have the authority to create a new school district, and nor would we want them to. So I deleted that out of the first paragraph here, an act concerning school districts providing for administrative review of resolutions to permanently close a school building. That is the most important part of this bill, and that's what this amendment speaks to. So if you turn to page 4 is the first balloons, and this is primarily what we've done here. So the administrative review, we've all agreed, is critically important. It's not currently happening. So we want to put that in statute. So not later than 90 days is a little too late. So we've made 90 days and 60 days, 45 days. You'll see that in here. So it expedites the process. So the very first balloon amendment here says that the State Board of Education shall conduct an administrative review of a resolution adopted pursuant to this section if the State Board receives a request from signed by at least 5% of the registered voters of such school district. So the smallest district in Shawnee County is Silver Lake. 5% of their registered voters would be 120 people, which seemed like a pretty reasonable number, you know, for requesting an administrative review. And that has to be received not later than 45 days after the adoption of that resolution. Again, it just moves things along faster so that they can find a resolution. So then you'll see where it says not later than 60 days is changed to not later than 45 days after the receipt of the request. The State Board will issue that advisory determination. Now, do know that that administrative review rubric has not been created yet because this is something new, so we have to give them time to do that. So then the next bullet or balloon says, if the State Board receives more than one request for administrative review, then on that same district resolution, then the State Board can dismiss any further requests. So they're only dealing with that initial one, so they don't need to do this multiple times. They get their, let's just say, 120 signatures, they do their administrative review within 45 days, and if they receive multiple requests, multiple signatures, they just have to deal with that one request. And then on line 43, you'll see no resolution adopted pursuant to this section shall be effective until the 45-day time period provided under this section has elapsed. Again, giving them time to do what needs to be done. We eliminated the judicial district court remedy. That really wasn't felt to be that necessary. It's really the administrative review that's most important. And then because most things that we do, most statutes that or bills that we approve, they take effect when it involves a school district on July 1 of whatever year, because that's the beginning of the new fiscal year for a school district. So I suggested that we do this effective July 1, 2024, because it gives them time to notify all districts. You now have an administrative review process in place if this is passed, and it gives them time to build that administrative review process at the State Department level so that they have a rubric that makes sense to school districts. So they need a little bit of time to do that. So that's why I moved that to July 1, 2024. And I would say we also, in trying to find a date to make this effective, we didn't want to harm any district that's currently in process that hasn't come before us yet. So those are the balloons.
Committee, what questions do you have? Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate some of the changes in this amendment. I think going from 1% to 5% makes complete sense. We do that on a lot of things within statute here in the state. And it makes sense also that can only trigger something like this once. You can't be constantly trying to challenge something. And then judicial review, removing the judicial review provisions makes sense. But however, striking all of Section 1, I mean, my understanding is Section 1 was helping to guide what happens if a district does dissolve, and hopefully bringing in a third party to kind of help work through this and protect larger schools from smaller schools as they kind of battle this out, because this is going to be an issue I think we're going to see more and more in the years to come.
The revisor can correct me.
Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair, sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. We already have that language in statute. If a district would dissolve, that's not new. We can already do that. So they just have a petition to dissolve, and then they can go through the state board process, and the state board then would attach them to another existing district. What we struck here, go ahead, Tamara. Is that correct? Okay. So what was really the important part of what was struck was what's in italics that says that a State Board of Education can create a new district upon the dissolution of a current district. Yes, Tamara? No. Yes? So we already have that in statute.
Through the Board of Education or through the state?
State. Mm-hmm. But a local board could apply to, Madam Chair, I'm so sorry.
Okay. You guys should have these conversations before we come into committee, but that's okay. We'll do it here. So go ahead. School district can what?
Yes,
Senator?
they can already apply to, and you could actually do a mutual agreement between school districts if one is wanting to consolidate with another to have a land transfer, and there's a process for that. Or you can go through the State Board of Education to get approval if you decide to dissolve to attach to another district.
So one of the things that, quite frankly, I think we wrestled with when we first had this hearing is, and we heard in testimony, is that members from the community had reached out to other districts to see if they could tether on with them. And their concern was no, because it's going to move them, it's going to slide them down as far as what that, because they tend to be, they're smaller districts. And so what their weighting is for that low enrollment, it would move them back up as opposed to moving them from where they were. So we're talking about two real issues here. We're talking about a mechanical issue. What's the process for school districts moving forward? Because we found a loophole where there really isn't a process for redress. But there is another component that we're going to continue to talk through, and I anticipate at some point when we're working on school funding budget, we'll be talking about school districts can skate the system and make decisions just because if we cleave off this building and this small community, we'll make more money from the state with our weightings. And so how do we, that's an interesting thing that doesn't really work well as far as de-incentivizing. So we'll have to be, I've already received some runs from JG. We're looking at it and coming up with what would be an appropriate strategy. But we're working there. There really are two components. It is that funding issue and the dilemma that it puts on that community that's essentially being voted out. So, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On this amendment, this would not affect either of the two communities or schools that we heard about in the hearing, correct?
Would not. And quite frankly, we are now, March 23rd?
Yeah, we're well past the 45 days.
3/23/23, and we are past the date that typically is in contracts with teachers where they would be notified if they wouldn't be continued. So we are really at, there's a saying for those that work at, teach in high schools, once you come back from spring break, it is a quick slide out to the end of the school year. And so, no, it does not address that. You're right, Senator Gossage. Yep.
So just real quickly, this amendment and what you said you were working on, do those go well together? Do they conflict?
It will probably be separate because one is
Separate.
policy, the other is funding.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
So, Senator Blasey.
When the maker of the amendment consider at least moving it up from July 1 to January 1. I think we heard from two communities that are currently facing this, and I think we're going to have more as we continue down this path. And I would ask that you consider moving it to January 1 in your motion.
Senator Dietrich.
Thank you. I certainly would consider that. It's just unusual to make it January 1. And the other thought that we had discussed a bit was we have new school board members who will be seated sometime during that first week of January, the first Tuesday of January. So the thought was, if it's July 1, then the sitting board has knowledge of what's happening and won't have to make these hard decisions as a brand-new board member. That was kind of my thought.
Senator Blasey.
I can respect that. However, I think maybe the population or elections that will take place in the fall might be a result of some of the decisions that are pending before the board, which is why I think January 1 might be important.
You're wanting January 1.
Page 5.
Page 5.
So Senator Dietrich's motion amending July 1 to January 1.
Of 2024.
Correct.
Senator Gossage.
Just to clarify, so the purpose of what this is designating is these things may go into effect after January 1 of 2024. Is that what I'm understanding? And you're saying go into effect after July 1 of 2024? Thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
I believe we are done discussing the amendment. Would you like to move your amendment?
Madam Chair, I would be happy to move my amendment, and I am very willing to consider January 1, 2024.
So are you wanting to make that right now?
I can do that now.
Okay. So she is moving the amendment with the change on line 7, which I'm sure would take it to line 8, but of January 1, 2024. Do I have a second? Second from Senator Gossage. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? The amendment passes. We are back on the bill. Yes, Senator Blasey.
I have just one quick amendment.
Okay. I appreciate that optimism because we've got 2 minutes, so we'll make it happen.
Would you like to explain it as it's being handed out?
Please do.
Time's sake.
Yes.
So this resolution is if a school building is, if a decision is made to close a school building after September 20th of the school year, which I believe is when we do counts in school years, the school building shall not be closed until after the end of the succeeding school year. This will allow communities to really begin to embrace this potential decision because schools are the foundation of our communities, and I think These are huge, very emotional decisions, and so this would just allow time.
So Senator Blasey, when we are looking at the balloon on page 4, if a resolution to close a school building is approved after September 20th, so let's just say September 20th of 2023 of a school year, the school building shall not be closed until after June 30th, and that would be of 2024.
Correct.
Okay.
And then on the second page, it takes what was January 1 in the previous motion that was just passed, but allows the state school board to adopt rules and regulations to implement and administer.
Committee, what other questions are there? Senator Sykes.
I want to clarify, so if there was a resolution that was approved September 21st of this year, 23, the school could not close until after June 30th of 2025?
Correct, the succeeding year. So to give another school year for families to, so if you're in school, let's say it's September today, and my kid's gonna finish this school year, they would get one more year. So if they're in first grade today, or say they're 7th graders today, and it's a K-8 building, they'll get their 8th grade year in the school year. It's not gonna be a sudden emotional decision.
Prolonging it for you. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Senator Gossage.
I'm just trying to think about the other, how those two fit together on, seems like it's a duplication, maybe it's not. We would have January 1st of 2024 twice, is that right? It would appear on line 8, and it would also appear on line 6 or 5.
We'll call on the reviser for that.
So in the balloon before you, the January 21, 2024 date is for the state board to adopt rules and regulations to implement this section. The January 1, 2024 date from the other bill would be the effective date that those provisions would go into law.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I understand the desire to have a transition, but when a district makes a decision to close a building, it's usually because either enrollment has shifted and they've got to do something to save some funds, or they've got so little enrollment in there it's not very efficient any longer, or the building is in such disrepair they are going to have to close, especially in smaller rural districts, they're going to have to close that building. It's, a hazard. So that would disrupt that process and might even be, in some instances, dangerous. So I understand wanting to transition, but I think to make that mandatory would be problematic, depending upon the circumstances, that's all, just depending upon the circumstances. So is there a way, I'm wondering, to make that a local decision based on certain circumstances?
Senator Blasey.
Well, I imagine the very reason for this bill is because local decisions have been made to close that school, and this therefore allows that smaller community, and I'm assuming it's because of enrollment, as we heard, at least in the examples given to us during the hearing, was not because of the building, because those buildings were ADA compliant, whereas the ones that are still open are not. This will allow those schools to have some time. I mean, I can imagine I'm on Christmas break and the school board decides to close my school, and then my next year is my senior year, and I don't get to celebrate my senior year in my school. This allows time.
And I think the point here is you are saying if they take the action after September 20th is when it kicks in. So any action prior to, okay. Senator Sykes.
I have one more question for Tamara. So based on the previous amendment that got on, we are saying this has to be effective on January 1st, and then if this amendment gets on, they just have to have rules and regulations by January 1st. So how does that work together?
That's a great question, and I can't speak to the state board's process in promulgating rules and regulations. There are some official steps that every agency has to go through when they do that. And I presume even if the bill weren't effective, if it passes, they would take steps toward a
We are really stretching it.
I know. So I was just reflecting back on what Senator Dietrich had said earlier about in the amendment that we passed, in removing section 1, that was redundant, what's already in law. So why would we need to have requiring the State Board of Education to adopt rules and regulations therefore?
We'll call on Tamara.
So the section 1 that was removed from the bill dealt with school districts and the dissolution of a school district and creating a new district and the attachment of territories to that new district. Section 2 of the bill is the one dealing with school building closures. And so these rules and regulations would be on the administrative review process for the school building closures.
Senator Gossage.
I know we have to get on the floor. I was just wondering if the carry of the amendment would be agreeable to, based upon what Senator Diedrich said on the balloon at the top of page 4, of saying unless the school was being closed due to disrepair.
So committee, this is what I suggest. We are not ready to take action on this amendment.
Okay.
We are meeting tomorrow at noon. Lunch will be provided of some sort. I don't know. I may be ordering Domino's for us. So bring your own bottle of water. How about that? We will meet at noon. We have this bill and we have 2 others to work on. So get those amendments in order and chat it up with each other. We are adjourned.